Greetings, everyone out there. This is Darren Austin Hall coming to you from a very beautiful, kind of noisy night here in Costa Rica. There's some beautiful birds and night critters all around. I just moved into this beautiful new house, this new casa up in the hills around Santa Teresa. I don't know if you can hear it on the microphone, but in the distance you can really hear the ocean still. Feel very blessed to be in this new setting. So I wanted to take a moment here to just reach out and talk about something that really came to me today. Some channeled wisdom on this matter of living in a post-truth world. This is something that I've been sharing with a lot of people in some really revelacious discussions, because it's really a quagmire out there right now in terms of trying to get information on what's going on, and we're seeing just an absolute just kind of implosion, if you will, of many different belief systems, and just still all this antagonism in our collective consciousness right now. The presidential inauguration, obviously, and everything that's going around that, swirling around that, is just triggering so many of us into projections, reactionary experiences, and some really beautiful, compassionate, and just wise responses as well. There's a lot to learn right now being a human being in the last few years. In my lifetime as a 41-year-old being, there's just been so much to learn, and you know, this is prophecy. This is what a lot of ancient and indigenous contemporary people have been saying, that we live in a great time of shift, of ages. We are living prophecy, and we are in a time of immense awakening on the planet. And this is something that's been going on really since the 1960s. It's been really igniting and culminating and reaching more and more paramounts. And I feel personally that we're at a very difficult juncture right now, in the sense that it just seems like there's so much information hitting us in the digital sphere of the internet right now, and it compounds things in the sense that so many of us are locked down. So most of our socializing is more or less happening in the virtual digital commons of the online space. And you know, the internet is not that old, and technology just keeps ramping up, and our nervous systems are playing a really dire and in some ways futile game of catch-up. And that's why I've also been crying that in the last year, you know, we really need to rest and repair. It's really time to get back to nature. And even though the COVID pandemic has been obviously a source of suffering for many people, for many families, it's also been a time where we've been afforded certain elements of rest, to just like at least unplug from the constant busyness of our society and try and do more. And I know not everyone has been that, but the majority of people have been just unplugged, as this system that this mode of civilization we live in is going through this like huge transmutation process through this adversity, this initiation, really. But what I really want to talk about today is this idea of living in a post-truth era. This is an idea that gets tossed around in philosophical circles, and what it really means is this: that right now, if you haven't noticed on social media, in all the different spheres, there's a lot of conflicts going on. There's a lot of confusion, and then a lot of people speaking with self-righteous conviction that they know the truth, and that conspiracy theorists, for example, are completely erroneous. And I mean, even now there's like renderings of them as domestic terrorists. And then on the other hand, you have, you know, people being named sheeple and normies and all kinds of just dehumanizing labelings, and this huge like guttural frustration in our consciousness. And then of course, just it's a kind of civil warring that is being more and more triggered, especially by what's happening in American politics, where they've been running this inane program of a two-party system, left, right, Democratic, Republican, for just way too long. And I think if anything we learned in the last 4 years, that both sides of the equation are steeped in corruption and lack of integrity. And, I've been taking a lot of heat online for calling out the left, and I've been calling out the right for years and years and years. I've kind of done calling out the right. I think the right has made itself very obvious in its failings, in being far too steeped for my own personal taste in religious demagoguery and in the whole extreme of the Christian belief system. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with Christianity and Jesus. I love the essence of Christianity. I love Jesus, but I love it in modes that are far from the institutionalization of those religious creeds and what has become of the right being swaddled and conflated with a lot of religious ideas which tend to constrict freedom of thought and progressive thought. But then on the left, you've been seeing, especially in the last 4 years, this like increasing radicalization, this movement, and I know people are like all up in airs about vernacular and stuff, and the left isn't fascist and stuff, and it's not to say like all of the left is fascist, but there's elements of the left that are championing the censorship of all these, would-be right-wing voices and the purges that are happening in censorship all over Twitter and Facebook and stuff. But what really hit me is that it's really funny with this whole QAnon thing, because I've been railing against, I've had my problems with the whole Q movement, and I also see part of its relevancy and why it's really taken off, and a lot of that is because we live in this post-truth era. But I also see on the other side, because I see the Q phenomena as being something that's really connected to the right, at least that's how the media tries to connect it to the right. But then on the left, you have all kinds of other conspiracies that are just as inane as Q, such as the whole idea of Russiagate and blaming Russia and bringing up all these tired McCarthyisms that, my gosh, like, come on, are we really going to fall for blame the Russia boogeyman again? But on one hand, it's really funny because I see both left and right are kind of exposing themselves as being hopelessly naive and vulnerable to manipulations. And I'm one, I've definitely fell down rabbit holes, especially more at the beginning of the Q movement, where I was like really looking into it. And a part of me still thinks that there's relevancy, at least in all this conspiratorial research that went down, because if you really look at the Q phenomena and what to me is quite dangerous and not, right thinking that's happening right now, is that people are conflating all investigation or inquiry into conspiracies as a product of Q, and that's just not the case. That's very disingenuous. Those of us who have been researching conspiracies, like myself, this stuff has been around for decades and decades and decades, and it was the CIA actually who weaponized this word conspiracy theory as a belittling label so that they could hide the fact that they were deeply involved in clandestine projects behind public view. And I, for one, studied media information and technoculture at the university level and came out of my studies with a very heightened sense of analytical analysis of, the military-industrial complex, the deep state, which had various names, different names at the time. But, now that we live in this era where the media is just ratcheting up so much antagonism, calling QAnon this and that, and then you have the right-wing media calling the Russiagators this and that. And really at the end of the day, if we just like zoom out, we're just a bunch of humans who really have no fucking idea what is going on right now, and I can almost feel Socrates like giving us a wink from the netherworld, with his famous last words purportedly, the only thing I know is that I know nothing. So what I mean by living in a post-truth era is that I think it's very clear to me, having studied media studies, that the media lie, that they are complicit in the grandest forms of manipulation on the planet. And they've been doing this for a very, very long time. But I will say that during Trump's presidency, I've never seen the media, and the mainstream media is largely on the left. I've never seen the media be so involved in absolute just deception. And that's not to say anything supportive of Trump. That guy has his own problems. But the fact that they have been trying to, just from the get-go, there was just lies about certain policies I was making. They were always exaggerating the claims of what he'd said, to the point where it was very clear doublethink. It was very clear Orwellian 2 + 2 = 5. And it's just horrendous. And it's gotten to the point where the media can no longer, and it couldn't have been counted on for truth before that, because we all know, at least I grew up with the Gulf War, the second Gulf War, where we saw the media pretty much trumpeting all kinds of lies that politicians had put forth when they conspired together to put this sham war forward that led to the loss of 100 or at least 1 million Iraqi civilians. Horrendous genocide of Middle Eastern people. The media was already complicit in that, not to speak of many other different wars and false flag events that the military-industrial complex perpetrated on the American psyche. And it's interesting also to acknowledge that the Grand Conjunction that happened in December 21st on the winter solstice with Jupiter and Saturn was rendered for me by John Lamlash, one of my teachers, as being truly this new octave, this reverberation of that 1960s energy of the rebellion of the masses against these monolithic media and government systems and their collusion in these great crimes against our consciousness. So we're seeing that being ratcheted up again among the population, this great pushback and resistance against this matrix of mind control that the media is now more than ever completely involved in. And why that creates a post-truth era is because now you no longer have any form of official voice of truth in the world. There's just no one. No one is speaking consistently any truth. The mainstream media, the alternative media, social media, there is no one truth that everyone, I think, can really connect to. We live in a time of profound obfuscation and profound confusion. And I know people like to say, we live in an age of tremendous misinformation. We need to combat this misinformation. I think even Biden's press secretary in her first address was saying that we're going to, wage war almost on misinformation. And it's just like, yeah, give me a break. I mean, you guys, their establishment politics is going to be just as misinformation as the right, as Trump was. It's just, it's been fake news for a very, very long time, folks. And the masses, I think, are really, really starting to wake up to that. The fifth estate, which the media was always supposed to be an arm of truth, of check and balance, was corrupted a long, long, long time ago when political elites realized how dangerous it was to have citizens really controlling journalism and really checking governments, as it was probably up until the 1950s. It was in the 1960s, I believe, when Operation Mockingbird was enacted by the CIA, and they fully infiltrated all of the media, not just in the US, but I'm sure in many parts of the world. So we live in a post-truth world, folks. It's impossible to know what truth is. So what that should do right off the bat is, and this is advice I need to heed as well, is that on social media, we should all come to each other in these discussions and these debates that are bringing out so much vehement emotion and realize, we all may have little pieces of the truth, but no one is owning the whole truth. And so we have to have compassion for each other. We have to realize that all of us are going to be flawed in the way that we logicize and rationalize the world. That's why a lot of people are actually getting very emotional in their discussions and their communications about things, because they don't rationally know what's going on, and that pisses them off, and they tend to get very emotional. So there's that. But I would say the hope in that matter of things is that we all do have fragments of truth, which means truth, something I've written before, truth is going to be from here on in a team effort. Truth is a team effort. And what that means is that we're going to have to really find out ways where we can discuss things in very humble, respectful, loving, playful, and even humorous ways, realizing the humor of just like the chaos and absurdity of the predicament that we live in right now. Now, something I also want to share that I think is also deeply profound is that in a post-truth era, I believe this era is a growing phase that we must go through. And I believe it's a very good thing, in fact. I was speaking to a friend the other day about how I believe that when people get on a spiritual path in their life, which tends to put a newfound purpose or telos in front of them, something that connects to something divine, if you will, which tends to usurp the purposes that are much more vacuous and trivial that our social conditioning gives us. When that happens, when someone starts to walk a spiritual path and starts to have a spiritual awakening and realize there's a whole other sense of reality that we've kind of had blinders upon, there is a kind of necessary phase, and that I would say is very existentialist, where you suddenly realize like all the old ways of thinking and believing about the world no longer make any sense anymore. And there's this kind of void, this dark night of the soul that can be very harrowing. And I think anyone who lives a spiritual life has had this experience. It's inevitable, it's natural. I went through one in my early 20s when I had a spiritual awakening, and I went through a 6-month period of absolutely not knowing what was real or truthful about anything. Especially after coming out of university, where I learned all about the propaganda and the disinformation about how our reality was constructed by the nefarious corruptions in the government and the media. And so right now, what we are witnessing is this kind of happening collectively, where we're entering into this growth phase where no one really knows what the heck is going on in our world. I mean, you just look at what the media is telling us right now. You've got like so many different conspiracy theories on both sides of the political spectrum. You've got the COVID pandemic and all the kinds of different angles about what that is, from like people, you know, believing in the vaccines, to people believing the vaccines are just these like DNA distorting weapons against us, to, you know, the Galactic Federation is all of a sudden a thing. It's in the news. I mean, it's just kind of mind-numbing after a while, just how much information digital media is just throttling us with. And the reason why it's essentially a post-truth era is because we've been conditioned in this society, in Western civilization. It's a subtle authoritarian society where we've been trained from a young age in the education system. I always look at our teachers first as authority figures, while our parents, our teachers, and then the media, and then the politicians. And now we're all sort of waking up and realizing that's total bullshit. And when you actually harken back to what the ancients were saying, like the ancient Gnostics, who I've been following and studying for over a decade now quite hard, is that you realize that for them, truth was an inside job. That was really about developing tools of self-mastery, self-governance, self-realization, which is one of the pinnacles of yogic experience, to self-realize oneself as the great self, as Carl Jung would say. That we are going through a growing phase where I think we're all being prodded to move into that, to return to actually knowing truth within ourselves as something that we can feel perhaps as a vibration in our hearts, more of a intuitive, instinctual, gut feeling kind of thing. And I know that's just absolutely terrifying to people. I mean, it's terrifying to people that people don't read the mainstream media anymore and go onto the internet and start reading YouTube channels, all this. For some people, that's like, what are you doing? That's just madness. How are you ever going to know what's real by trusting some Joe Schmo like me who's just speaking to his phone on YouTube? And I would say that, yeah, truth right now is a much more dangerous thing, because now that those like monolithic authorities have sort of been exposed as a sham, now it's like all these other people are trying to take up the slack. And some, again, as I said, we all have kind of pieces of truth. Some people have pieces of truth, but until we actually start to come together and discuss and put all these pieces together, which can take a lot of respect considering and diligence, considering how divided we are right now, But I'd much rather it be through this phase where we're now wrestling with what truth is on our own. We're trying to figure out on our own. And yeah, there's tons of like complete baseless theories out there, but there's also some tremendous citizen journalism happening out there that could have never been allowed in the mainstream arena, where you have so much corporate control and so much rigidity and censorship. But I really feel that an eventual phase that we're going to get to is this return to realizing what intuition and intuitive intelligence is, which is all about this movement of regenerating the divine feminine, the feminine side of our psychology, of our psyche, of our being. Because the feminine, the persecution of women that has been going on in patriarchy on a very visceral level, is actually the persecution of the inner woman, the inner feminine in all beings, whether they are women or men. All beings have suffered this kind of persecution of this side of their being. This side of their being has been relentlessly assaulted and abused and genocided, really. And we're all carrying that wound in the sense that we've been living in a much more masculine, methodical, rational, logical-based mindset of how do we apprehend truth. And that's why I've been a huge critic of empirical Western modern science as well, because there's a lot of patriarchal hubris in modern science that we need to check. And it's not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. In the end of the day, the ultimate goal is going to be where the masculine and the feminine are actually doing like this tantric tryst, like the yin-yang, and they're actually working, complementing, and self-generating each other, or mutually generating each other, rather. And that is, to me, our ultimate destiny. And so what that means is we're going to be moving into this phase where we're going to be fulfilling what a lot of the ancients tell us, and that is that truth is an inside job, that your heart, as the ancient Chinese said, is the master of vibrations, and as Heart Math Institute now tells us in a great correspondence, is that the heart has the biggest electromagnetic field in our being. It senses our world much more sensitively than any other organ in our body, including our brain. It actually has neurons. We thought neurons were just part of the brain cells, but they're actually part of the heart too. So they're more like consciousness cells in a way, although everything's conscious, but that's a whole other discussion. But when someone can actually sit in deep states, for example, of deep awareness, of more synthesizing awarenesses, which what happens when one enters into deep states of alpha brainwave state and theta brainwave state, the two hemispheres of the brain start to actually work together, which is one of the boons of meditation. And it's my belief that when you're entering into meditation, you're actually moving from a subjective, individualistic mind to a deeper objective realm of more universal truth, of really apprehending things that are more commonly true. Perhaps cosmic laws, for example. And that's why I think a lot of the great spiritual masters were able to glean these incredible eternal truth about reality, because they realized that truth is something that you can just literally sit with your being and your body and sit in connection with nature. Nature being the greatest teacher of wisdom on the planet. That's why they called her the goddess Sophia. That's what the earth was called, the goddess of wisdom. Sophia meaning wisdom, philosophy being the love of Sophia, the goddess that is wisdom. That all spirituality, which is truly the ardent science of universal truth and unity, spirituality is literally just sitting and being deeply connected to nature. First your own nature, and then realizing, well, what we all are is a part of this greater nature, which is terrestrial on Earth, and then also on a multidimensional level, a cosmic nature. And that phase, I believe, is already starting to happen. That's why you're seeing such a massive ignition of people interested in spirituality and people delving into meditation and delving into all of these arts and sciences of inner landscaping. People are realizing, my gosh, I can know so much more about myself and about the world just by sitting out in nature. In fact, that was the essence of almost all the mystical traditions. They were all forest-dwelling sages, literally. They just sat in the forest and gathered information, downloads, because nature is always speaking to us. She's always instructing us. This was the whole essence of the vision quest, was to go out onto the land, making a sacrifice of a fast, perhaps for 3 days, where you have no food and no water, because this is naturopathy. The indigenous understood that when you drink water and eat food, you're actually distracting yourself through the mechanisms of your body of thinking actually clearly. And also on another dimension, because there's always multi-dimensions to truth, you're just making an offering of sacrifice, which was seen as a kind of ascetic way of offering to the goddess, to Mother Earth, and saying, hey, I'm here, instruct me. And it was said that the goddess would, that Mother Earth would instruct you on some of the highest teachings of who you are, what is your purpose, and what are your gifts to give to the world. Things that you can't exactly find in books. It's like Morrissey said, nature is a book, can't you read? And this is really beautiful stuff. And this is, I think, where we're headed. And this is why, a lot of people are starting to move out of cities and go to places like Costa Rica. And I just recently wrote a Facebook post where I talked about this, how after a year of living in Costa Rica, I just celebrated 1 year here. It's amazing to live in this natural environment and to just have felt in the last year that I've been surrounded by jungle, forest, animals this whole time, and just seeing what has happened to the expansion of my mind, my knowledge, my wisdom. It's absolutely profound. Like, our souls are so constricted. There's such a claustrophobia of mysticism that happens in urban settings, and that's why we need to return to eco-villages and innovate and pioneer this new evolution of human design, of human cultural development, and as in communities in the earth. And when that happens, which it is happening, we're going to see a lot more people are going to start to ascertain what truth really is, because they'll realize that they can build a kind of intuitive knowing, an intuitive knowing. We always talk about this stereotypically in like heterosexual sort of context, that women always know what's going on, before a man does. She can like read his mind. And I think there's absolute truth to that. Women are more intuitive. There's actually like natural reasons for that, which I'll just get into quickly just to highlight this point. But something that I've learned in my studies is that, when women bleed with their menses once a month, the Shen in Chinese medicine, which is your consciousness, your soul, is magnetized in the blood. That's just how metaphysically we work on a mystical biological level. And so when women bleed once a month, they're actually cleaning their soul. And in some shamanic traditions, they actually say they're also cleaning the soul of the world, which is super powerful stuff. Thinking about the cleaning of what was called the anima mundi. And this is just why women are so wonderful and so sacred just by their nature, that they do this work, which can be very harrowing each month. But by doing that, their soul, their deeper essence tends to be more clear than men. Men to be much more obscured in feeling from that deeper nature. And that's why, for instance, the sweat lodge was created in some indigenous societies that I've been taught by indigenous teachers, was to cleanse men in a way so that they could kind of keep a pace of women, realizing that women had this kind of higher ability inborn. And so that explains why women have this kind of intuition, that they know things more clearly. And if we actually honor that, we can see why women should be more exalted in leadership roles on the planet right now and forevermore, at least in equanimity with men, which we still have a long way to go, because women just get that, and we need to bring that more intuitive, instinctual intelligence and way of absorbing truth forward. And men can get there. Men can sensitize themselves as well. All beings can, which is really wonderful. So I'll leave that there. We're coming up to 30 minutes. I always like to be a long-winded man, and hopefully you stuck with me through that whole thing. That felt like a really beautiful transmission, and I just want to thank Source and all my guides and all the beings that speak through me, and especially big props to Merlin, who I consider one of my great spirit guides and who I've been working with for many lifetimes. I just hope that we can see this context right now, that we are in a post-truth world. It's a phase. We're not going to stay here, but just have compassion for one another right now. That's like the big message I want to send out there in the world. Have compassion. Try and do your best to get out of this dualistic thinking about you're right, they're wrong, left, right, whatever it is. Try and have a sense of humor more about things. Try and be just really nice and kind to each other, especially if you disagree with a person's point of view. Try and come into a discussion with them if you choose to engage them, not with a spirit of like aggressive confrontation and self-righteousness, but come with them with that humility that neither of you know the whole truth of the matter, that each of you has a little piece of the truth, and that perhaps there's a way that you can come together and synthesize that truth and make it a learning experience for both of you, because that's all we're basically doing right now. And just to come from that spirit of kindness in our discussions, it's going to go a long way to help us as we move through this phase, taking back the power of truth from this crumbling, mediated matrix that is so antiquated and has done such a disservice to our consciousness. You know, go and look at Graham Hancock's TED Talk, The War on Consciousness, if you really want to know what's up. And from there, you know, just spend more time with yourself in nature, meditating. And instead of just having a revelation, then immediately going to social media and platforming it, just sit with it. Just sit with it. You know, a lot of the indigenous and shamanic teachers I've worked with, they've always said, you know, if you get a really big revelation, sit with it for at least like a couple days, if not a week. You know, every time the sweat lodge circles I was in back in Toronto when I was living there, you know, one of our great teachers, he would say, you know, if you have beautiful teachings that come to you in the sweat lodge, don't write or say them to anyone for a week. You know, really sit with it. And I think in a culture of instant gratification and social mediation, where we can just like boom, like make posts all the time, that a lot of us lack that kind of humility and patience. And I speak that for myself too. I'm by no means perfect in that. But I think those few things are going to go a long way to helping us just make this transition, as I do believe it's a transition. And just spending more time in meditation, in spiritual practice right now, where you're resensitizing and energizing your energetic self so that we can be much more resonant with the powers of the heart, which is where intuitive intelligence really lies, so we can start to know truth as a vibration and all the kind of like mystical downloading ways that truth comes to us through those more spiritual channels. I think there's a great future ahead of us. I think after this phase, there is an age burgeoning of universal truth where we're all going to start to be more united in understanding what reality is as we all become kind of Gnostics, self-realized, self-initiated, self-governing beings on the path of self-mastery. This is the true ascension. This is what is happening. This is what is rising up in all of us. And paying homage to the ancestors who really figured this out. You know, read the great spiritual texts, mystical texts, and you'll get right there. These great masters who are getting these downloads, not from books, yes, from their own teachers as well, but usually from their own work of just, you know, sticking the ladle of their consciousness deep in their soul, in awareness practices of meditation and such, and presence, and just really discovering, you know, the deeper realities of truth in that. So that's my humble hope for us all, and I'm really hopeful because I think we're really going to get there, and we're already starting to see the first wave of that. So I hope you enjoyed this spiritual transmission. My name is Darren Austin Hall. You can follow me on Instagram at Darren Druid. Go onto my YouTube channel and check out some of the beautiful music videos I've been putting out for my new album, Honor All Creation, which is available right now on Bandcamp. You can listen and purchase it there. It'll be up on Spotify early February. We have a beautiful online course that'll be coming out as well in accompaniment of the album. And it'll also coincide with the launching of the Gaia Awakening Virtual School, which I'm going to be the director of, and which will one day this year, in hopes, in prayer, in collaboration with Source and Creation, it will be a physical school as well. So sending infinite love and blessings to all of you out there. Be kind to each other, love each other. None of us have the whole truth. Truth is teamwork, and it's an inside job. And sending you all so much big love from the land of Pura Vida, the paradise that is